This is At Core, where psychology sometimes meets pop culture and occasionally flirts with disaster. I'm Chloe Jackson, your host, counselling trainee, overanalyzing by vocation, and someone who thinks that heartbreak should count as fieldwork. So today I am diving into something that I categorically promised myself that I wouldn't do an episode about. And that is Lily Allen's West End Girl. And if you've been living under a rock, I will explain what I mean by West End Girl. That is Lily Allen's newest album, which she has literally just mic dropped into the social stratosphere. And it is a part confessional, part cautionary tale, and basically the sound of a woman auditing the emotional receipts of her marriage. So before we begin, I just want to explain myself a little bit. And I don't know why I'm feeling like I have to justify what I want to speak about on my own podcast. However, I think after some analysis, which is what I do best, of myself, I have come to the conclusion that something that I am triggered by and just really dislike in others is those that just jump on the bandwagon and especially just to do things for ratings and everybody putting their 2p piece in and having an opinion, especially when it comes to another person's relationship or, you know, relationship breakdown. And so I think that's why I'm feeling a little bit cringe as I'm recording this podcast. But in explaining myself further, I will say that although I promised myself I wasn't going to record this, after listening to Lily's album, West End Girl, I just could not. I could not stay away. And the reason being isn't for the gossip. It isn't to jump on the pop culture bandwagon or to, in some kind of an attempt to get ratings. I can promise you that this is very much still a counselling podcast. And this episode is actually going to focus on something a little bit different to what you've probably heard before in terms of an analysis of Lily's album. So let's get to it. And I'm going to explain exactly what that is. So you can see in the title of this episode, I ummed and ahed about what to call it because I really wanted to get across the fact that I'm not just jumping on the gossip train. And so I've called it Unrules of Love. So Lily Allen, open marriage and the myth of the cool girl, which I think just describes Lily perfectly. Am I a Lily Allen fan? Yes and no. I would say yes. I'm not a huge fan. I don't know all of her music. I did sort of grow up listening to her music. So in that sense, I am very familiar, but I'm not a super fan by any means. I actually didn't know much about her relationship with David Harbour, who, again, if you're not familiar, but you probably are by now with everything out there in the social media world. They have now divorced, and it sounds as though it has been quite a messy ordeal for Lily and everybody involved. But that's not why we're here. So the reason that I'm here talking at you, I was going to say to you, definitely at you today, is to unpack the album, to unpack the lyrics, but primarily, it's to explore how emotional intelligence can't always outsmart heartbreak. And also to look a little bit on how women in particular are judged for the rules that they didn't write. And also why the cool girl myth still polices female pain. So it's going to be a good one. It's going to be deeply human. It's going to be pop psychology, but with a bite. So let's get to it. So here's the thing. When it comes to Lily Allen, I think that anybody who is familiar with her can agree that she comes across as strong. She's articulate, she's self-aware, and of course, she's famously unfiltered. So when I think of Lily, I think of the type of woman that you imagine that heartbreak wouldn't dare approach. And yet it did. And I think this really tells us something about love, about power, and again, about that myth that if we're emotionally intelligent enough, we can somehow outthink pain. And that is the bit that I want to focus on today. So to do that, I do need to obviously talk about the album and what the album's about. So I touched upon it at the beginning there. West End Girl is at its core, I would describe it as an emotional autopsy. There's 12 tracks and they chart the rise and slow implosion of a marriage, basically, that tried to be modern and it tried to be open and enlightened. But actually, that marriage buckled under its own contradictions. So I'd say from listening to the album, and I will admit, I literally have only listened to it once. And am I a fan? Not particularly. Musically, did it move me? Not really. But the lyrics, I am a massive fan of Lily's emotional vulnerability and openness. And I think that's the thing that's captivating people with this, especially not knowing much of the story beforehand. She literally mic dropped on the album release. So again, I would describe it less as a breakup album, although people are describing it as one, than actually what it is, which is a field study in cognitive dissonance. That's how I view this through my psychological counselor, trainee counselor lens, which I know, again, is always a bit sad when you just can only see the world through that lens, but I can't help it. So if you listen to the tracks, there's a track on there called Tennis, and Denial just hums all the way through that. And then another track called Madeline, which I think that's actually a name that she's given for the mistress. I don't think that is David's mistress's real name. And I think she's had to change that for legal purposes. But that aside, that basically focuses on the boundary testing that supposedly David carried out throughout their relationship. And I haven't even mentioned, I'm assuming that you have some background knowledge here in terms of what supposedly played out between Lily and David. I've literally skipped through that because I've got quite excited. So I apologize. Before I go on, I'll recap. So David and Lily split. I don't know the details of how long ago because I'm not really focused on all the gossip and the details and the minutiae. But they were together, I think, around 5 years. Again, this isn't the podcast for the exact details of the celebrity ins and outs. She has 2 children from a previous relationship, and it's my understanding that David did take the place of their sort of pseudo dad, which is a very hard role for anybody to fill. And I believe the girls were particularly close with him. They got married, and basically the beginning of the album, which we'll talk about in a moment, really sets the tone for what supposedly played out, or at least Lily's version of that. And that's important to say is one-sided. So a lot of people are sort of gunning for Lily and saying, well, you know, this is one-sided. How do we know this is true? But basically what she's implying is that they got married. She then got this part in a play after she had actually moved to America with David, and they've bought this perfect house, you know, white picket fence. Sounds quite extravagant as well. And then she got a part in a play in London, hence the title, West End Girl. And she then obviously moved back to the UK. And during that time, she gets a phone call from him. And within that phone call on the album, it's sort of one-sided. But basically, he sounds as though he, from what's implied from her responses, is saying that he wants an open relationship, to which she responds, I would say, cautiously, not negatively, but with great sadness is the impression that you get from listening to that title track. But we'll talk about that more in a moment. But that's just a bit of a back story if you're coming into this episode completely blind, which is probably unlikely. So enough of all the details. There are a number of tracks, as I say. So we got to Madeline, and then there's another one. So some of the titles are great. Non-monogammy, where basically just bargaining breathes through that. And at the beginning with that West End Girl track, it's like a weary acceptance in Lily's voice. So what I'm getting at here is just to paint the picture, whether you listen to it or not. I'll do you a favor if you don't want to, but every song sounds like a therapy session that she's just accidentally left the mic running for. So yeah, we'll go back to the title track. So the way I sort of described this or thought about this after I heard it is as the quiet cracks before the rupture. So in the title track, she sings, "I thought that was quite strange, so very strange, but I ignored it. Went ahead and I bought it. It's domestic, it's devastating, and it's the sound of someone clocking the tremor beneath their feet and just deciding it's basically just the plumbing." And I can't speak for everybody listening, but I think it is a fair assumption to say that I imagine, and definitely from my own experience, that a lot of people have probably been in a similar situation whereby those so-called red flags are staring you in the face, and you can feel intuitively and instinctively that it's not right, it doesn't sit right, yet you choose for whatever reason, and I do believe Lily had plenty of them, to ignore them and just push them aside. And I just want to touch on that because Lily's been getting a lot of stick in the media, and this is another area that, you know, prompted me to do this episode, because it's just so disappointing how time and time again, and I'm guilty of it too, so I'm not saying that I'm immune to this at all. I just think the difference is that I'm self-aware enough to reflect on it and admit that I am guilty of it. But it's that fact that women in particular, and men, but often, very, very often, place the blame back on the woman in the situation. And you'll hear things in the comment sections referring to Lily dropping this album, such as, "She deserved it. She knew what she was doing. She chose to ignore it. She was stupid." But one thing they're not accounting for is the risk that she probably calculated, whether that was consciously or subconsciously, in agreeing to something that felt uneasy for her in those early stages. I mean, you're talking about financial ties, you're talking about professional and social status, which, yes, aren't necessarily morally as admirable as some of the others that I'm going to mention, but they're still massive factors to consider when you're talking about potentially either agreeing to something that you're not comfortable with and staying in the relationship, or not agreeing and being perceived as the difficult one who potentially could devastate the entire relationship as she knew it in a matter of moments. And then you're talking about the illusion of that cool girl again and what Lily stands for. And there's perhaps she doesn't want to be in a monogamous or didn't want to be in a monogamous relationship, but it doesn't necessarily mean that she signed up for what was to come, and we'll get to that. But I think the main thing that people are discounting, and it's interesting because on the flip side of this, they're also talking about her children a lot, but that is the fact that her children viewed David, I believe by this stage, as a father figure, or at least a type of father figure. And people really are not putting enough weight on what that probably meant to Lily. And I'm making some assumptions here too. But we'll get back to that because I'm waffling a bit. So later, she admits, now I'm in London, this is on one of the tracks, and I'm all alone. I'm in a hotel room. I'm all on my own. Now I'm a West End girl. That line is not about geography. To me, all I can hear when I listen to that is dislocation. So Lily's at this stage achieved something glittering and great, yet the emotional scaffolding has quietly collapsed. So in attachment terms, we would say that she's performing competence while actually living in abandonment, and that is devastating. It is a day-to-day devastation. And when she closes with, in that terms of that first track, I think it's called West End Girl, the first track, with that sort of monologue or, well, one-sided phone call where you can only hear her side. She says, I guess I just want you to be happy. I love you. Bye. And it just sounds so hauntingly polite. And there's a term that we actually use in therapy, which I love and I use it a lot. And it's called grace fatigue. And to me, that is like the best example of grace fatigue, which basically is when you've forgiven so much that you start sounding like an answering machine for your own pain, which is so clever because she literally sounds like she's speaking on an answering machine almost. But it just makes me think of that grace fatigue. When you've just forgiven and you just in agreement. So let's go back to Madeline. I keep wanting to say Madeline. Madeline? I'm not sure. Where basically she discusses, she relays how this agreement between her and David, if you can even call it an agreement, it doesn't sound much like an agreement from that snippet of the one-sided phone call, but we'll call it an agreement for argument's sake. So when an agreement becomes a wound. So in Madeline, which by the way, I think is a track that should just be played in every couples therapy seminar. She confesses, we had an arrangement, be discreet and don't be blatant. There had to be payment. It had to be with strangers, but you're not a stranger, Madeline. Like, this is what I would describe as emotional contract law. So it sounds, and again, this is Lily's reality or lived experience. So I can't speak for David, but what people don't quite grasp about someone's lived experience, especially that they've put it out there, they've been brave enough to risk quite a bit by putting it out there like that for everybody to examine. What people don't realize about that is whether or not that was David's experience, this was her reality. And I think we really have to give her the benefit of the doubt that this is 100% or at least 99% her truth. She may have dramatized bits or changed names in places, as I say, maybe for legal purposes. But ultimately, I think it's really important for the sake of the level of emotional vulnerability that she's expressing, whether or not it's cutthroat and to sell records. I don't think that somebody with 2 children who has come across quite as articulate and self-aware and often very intelligent as Lily Allen would do this just for the ratings. But I digress. So I was saying it sounds like emotional contract law to me. So yeah, they built rules. This is how it feels when you listen to it. That they built rules to feel safe inside of something that is inherently unsafe, which is this idea of this open relationship, which, by the way, we're not here to talk about my own personal preferences, but I do find, open relationships tricky to get my head around. But obviously, again, as a trainee counsellor and as any kind of practitioner in a therapeutic sense, you are trained to try and see somebody's perspective that may differ from your own from every angle. So, whether or not that's for me or not, I can most definitely understand that regardless of whether that's something that I would never entertain, for these two people, it could have worked. But in any agreement, especially romantically, there must be boundaries and there must be a clear and respectful agreement, which is mutual. And that goes for any relationship really, but 100% in any romantic relationship. So I would argue, again, from what we're hearing in this album, which is, I believe, what really Lily's key message is that David, or the person she speaks about, broke the clause that mattered, which is emotional containment. So I should mention, by the way, just legal purposes, she does not mention obviously his name or I believe anyone's names within this album. So all speculative. It may not be about David Harbour, but just putting it out there. We'll refer to he instead of David from now on. So the person she speaks about within the album broke the clause that mattered, which is emotional containment. So when she says you're not a stranger, it isn't jealousy as much as people want to sit there and critique Lily, probably because it makes them feel better about possibly their own choices or their own relationships or their own moral compass. I don't hear that as jealousy in the slightest. I hear the sting of boundary betrayal. So as far as I can gather, the rule between them with this open relationship was never don't sleep with others. And she makes that quite clear from what she says about there must be payment, etc. It was don't make intimacy a weapon, which sounds as though that's exactly what he did. So again, psychologically, it's pure cognitive dissonance. So she agreed to openness in theory, so equality, honesty, autonomy, but actually in practice, she's left policing an arrangement that only worked on paper. So again, I would argue it's not about sex, as much as everybody wants to make it about that, because, that's the saucy stuff to talk about. It's actually all about respect and the quiet humiliation of becoming the adult in someone else's experiment. So then we move on to, and this is such a mouthful, non-monogamy, which is like an awesome title of a track, which is sort of like an emotional admin of being evolved. So she sings, I changed my immigration status for you to to treat me like a stranger. Why do I feel like such a failure? A life with you looked good on paper. It's the sound of someone, basically, who performed progressiveness so convincingly. that she forgot to check that she was actually okay. And this ties into my point earlier. I call that performative consent. And this is something that is so close to my heart because as a female in particular, and as somebody who is a people pleaser, I think not so much now, but definitely in my sort of early 20s and young, probably more teenagehood, performative consent was happening all the time. And I think it is really common, especially in young girls, which is basically when saying yes feels easier than explaining why you don't want to. And I'm not just talking about, I'm not even talking about sex. I'm talking about all different types of agreement. And we see this in therapy constantly. So people mistaking emotional tolerance for emotional health. So in Lily's case, she didn't want to be the jealous wife or the cliche. She's definitely not that cliche housewife or Hollywood housewife. And she didn't want to look like the unenlightened one. So I believe that she then said yes to an idea of freedom, but that idea of freedom quietly erased her. And here's the thing, and I'm not a raging feminist by any standard, but we have to acknowledge there is a gender twist here. So when a man experiments with openness, he still in 2025 very often is praised for honesty. And when a woman does, she's either desperate or delusional. It's the same behavior, but it's opposite verdicts. So, patriarchy absolutely loves to disguise double standards as empowerment. And that is quite infuriating, especially that that's still happening. And I think, again, it's like that thing, if this can happen to Lily, it can happen to anyone. So I think too many people need to get off their high horses and actually really examine what they might do in that situation. And I think another thing that people are forgetting here, which is obviously key, other than the biggest one for me, which is that she had two young girls to think about, is also that she obviously did love him. I think that comes across quite strongly. So, we're not talking about an arranged marriage or I'm sure there's aspects of living up to expectations and choosing her partner because of X, Y, and Z, or, there's some convenience factors there. But I believe that it comes across quite strongly from various interviews and whatnot over time, how strong her feelings actually were. So I think that's another factor that people are being very, very harsh in terms of criticizing her choices in sticking with him and what he wanted. So let's talk a little bit more about that judgment reflex. So why we blame the woman. So it really does fascinate me so much as a trainee counsellor and also just as a recovering judger of my own gender, just how quickly the narrative has turned on her. So I'm recording this probably about a week after I listened to the album. And I know I'm way behind. There's been like a million different podcasts and various bits of media out there. People are putting out about this album, reviewing, etc. So I know I'm really behind the times. But like I say, I'm not here to do it for the ratings or jump on the algorithm of Lily Allen. But I kind of wanted to wait because I wanted to see some of those comments as well from people, not because they would change what I was going to bring to this episode in any way whatsoever, but I actually wanted to include this part because exactly what I thought has transpired, which is, again, how quickly people have turned, especially women, which again is so disappointing. You know, that she agreed to it. She wanted an open marriage, and she's the cool girl that got burnt. And some people just love that because it's the demise of, you know, the great. And I just think, you know, we still punish women for being both too naive and also too aware. So you refuse and you're controlling, agree and you're complicit. But either way, we treat your pain as a lifestyle choice. And men just aren't getting that same treatment or judgment. And I think that ties into where I wanted to title this episode with the cool girl myth. So that cool girl myth runs on that double bind. You know, Lily is sexually liberated, but never needy. She's witty, but she's never wounded. She lets men misbehave because she's above jealousy. But actually, the truth is that the cool girl is just emotional suppression, basically just in better makeup. So I think she's actually performing sort of that chill persona, because actually the alternative, which is being called dramatic, costs way more than silence. And that would be one of my biggest takeaways from this. I mean, this is why once I listened to the album, again, it's not a musical masterpiece, but lyrically, I think it's amazing. And I think it's so raw and brave. And I think it's just a record that just burns that archetype down. I thought it might come across before listening to it as a bit of a tantrum, but it's not. And again, that's why I'm here talking about it, because it's not a tantrum. It's like a thesis. That's how it sounds to me. You literally can take, I know a lot of other podcasts and whatnot are taking the lyrics a bit like I have and sort of analysing them. But you can literally take so many lyrics from each track. You know, you're talking like 20 lines from each. And she's just not narrating heartbreak. To me, it sounds like she's interrogating that cultural gaslighting that told her, like, basically composure was maturity. And I just think, like, for that, I commend her all day long. And it enables other people to do the same, not to go and air their dirty laundry necessarily. I'm never a fan of that personally. But in her position, we have to remember that this is Lily's brand. She's known for that. And, you know, in fairness to her, she is an artist. So what do artists do? They take from their life and they make that into art, which is then available to others to inspire, you know, whether it's to sell or just to inspire. That's what they do. So it's not like your everyday person blasting their ex on Facebook. It's very different game, if you like. So talking of games, I wanted to talk a little bit about that sort of game where freedom becomes a power game, and look a little bit more on the couple dynamics. So I think what we're really hearing across this album is a breakdown of reciprocity. So open relationships can work. I have seen them work. Again, it's not necessarily something that I would ever entertain. But I think that open relationships can only work when both people have equal power, equal voice, and equal safety. And that, I think, has got lost somewhere in translation and in people's minds when their judgment just overtakes. So I would argue that in this case, openness became asymmetry. So one partner's liberation was built on the other partner, in this case, Lily's suppression. And I think that is just the real dark psychology of the so-called Unrules of Love. It's just such a dark and deep area to explore, and once you go down that rabbit hole, trust me, you'll never get out for days on end. This is why couples therapy is just so fascinating. But basically, the unrules of love, is when your rules are optional until the powerful partner breaks them, and then suddenly it's the other's fault for feeling hurt, and that is very difficult to witness, especially in the therapy room, but difficult to witness, and most importantly, difficult to endure if you are that partner where it's become your fault for feeling hurt all of a sudden. And again, do I blame Lily if that's where she was at for putting this out there? Probably not. So let's be honest, healthy openness is a dialogue. I mean, hers became a monologue where she was applauding from the wings, and that's how it sounds. That's what I get from the album. And it's a reminder for me that even in progressive dynamics, if we want to call this progressive, I wouldn't call this progressive, but this is an example of trying to be progressive, that patriarchy sneaks in through tone of voice, through who apologizes first, or maybe who through whose freedom costs more. So yeah, a lot to think about when it comes to those power dynamics with couples, and maybe to think about in your own relationship. There's also a track I really wanted to talk about. I've written it down here. Sleepwalking is what it's called. And it's sort of about the mind being on autopilot. So she admits in it, I'll read the lyrics. I don't know if you do it intentionally, but somehow you make it my fault. You don't stop talking and I'm just sleepwalking. Oh, I just think, again, that like literally, I've just got goosebumps, because as cheesy as that sounds to me, and I really dislike this word because it has been absolutely violated and overused and misused, but I'm going to use it because this does apply. To me, that line I've just read is gaslighting, just with a beat. And what I mean by that, it's when your reality is constantly rewritten, you do stop trusting your own senses. So what happens is the body goes into freeze mode, which is the trauma response that looks calm but is really just collapse. So she does name it. And to me as well, I think, again, why I really wanted to talk about it today is because what she's doing here so beautifully on this album, she's obviously airing her dirty laundry. Yes, she's obviously taking the opportunity to, do I want to say slate her ex-partner? I think not so much slate. I think she's taking the opportunity to expose. Yeah, she's doing that. But what she's also doing is showing her growth. You can tell, just wholeheartedly, I can tell listening to this, the amount of work that she's done in the background. And I'm not talking musically, I'm talking therapeutically, whether that's with a sit down professional practitioner, or whether she's, I would suggest and I would expect, just based on some of the level of awareness and the weight that is on her shoulders in terms of treading cautiously with this album, that she most definitely has been to therapy. And I'm pretty sure I've heard her in her podcast with Nikita talk about therapy a million times. So I'm making that assumption here as well. But even if she'd just gone away and done a lot of work on her own, you can tell the amount of work she's done and healing and recovery to get to this point is quite immense. So healing doesn't actually begin with forgiveness. It begins with vocabulary. It would help if I could speak. And what I mean by that is once you can sort of language the chaos, you can actually start to leave it. It's that really like strange period where you can't explain anything and your mind is just foggy, and that's usually a good indicator of being in an unhealthy dynamic or some people might want to say toxic relationship. But an unhealthy dynamic can make you feel incredibly foggy to the point where you can't even express or put into words what is going on. And it's not until you're through that fog, so to speak, that you can put language to that chaos. And only really at that stage you can leave it. And again, ties into therapy beautifully, obviously, because that's exactly what we do. So I am almost done. I've gone way over time, but I don't even care because I'm really enjoying talking about this. So the bigger picture, if we look at this album, she's using music as a mirror, which she's done so beautifully. She's always done it, but this is like almost like the peak. I don't know if she's going to be able to top it. Musically, she definitely can, because I wasn't that impressed. Sorry, I'm not a music critic. That's a personal opinion. But lyrically and, again, emotional vulnerability, I don't think she'll ever top this. And across this album, West End Girl, songwriting becomes her exposure therapy. So Tennis shows the discovery where she says, I read your text and now I regret it. That moment where awareness just shatters denial. And then you have moments like West End Girl, where she loops back to that agency and the painful calm of someone sort of re-entering herself. And all of this is narrativizing trauma. So turning survival into authorship, which is really cool. I just think that's like my favorite thing that people do. And people are getting really good at that. I think like people are getting a lot more brave just with social media. And obviously there's a lot of access to just air our grievances and speak openly. And then there is a big movement, which is really good. Obviously a massive advocate for talking therapy, obviously, and just talking in general. Yes, there does need to be boundaries around that. But I think what's interesting is that with this album, because she's had to be careful legally, she would have sought a lot of legal advice, I expect, and also probably therapeutic advice with regards to protecting her loved ones, her children, etc. But she's still turning that survival into authorship, and hopefully she gets something from it as well. But every lyric in this album becomes a psychological field note. Like I said, there is so many lines you can literally like write a whole dissertation on this. And she's documenting what counsellors call dual awareness, which is feeling the pain while observing the pattern, which is so cool. Again, I just geek out like with noticing how much she's doing that throughout this album. And again, it just makes me think that she's done, obviously she's probably not sitting there thinking, oh, I'm going to do some dual awareness here. But she is subconsciously aware of that, I believe, through the work that she's done, because she's constantly feeling the pain and observing the pattern through this album. So to close, what does Lily teach us about love? So I think it's really important to always take something from such an awful and obviously heartbreaking outcome. But I think what's so positive for me when I hear this album is she really teaches us that intelligence doesn't immunize you from heartbreak. So no matter how much work you may have done, and that's not to say it's a waste, because it's never wasted, but unfortunately there may be people that you come across in life that still will test your boundaries, push you outside of your limits, and don't necessarily have the same intentions as you do. And as somber as that sounds and a bit negative, and I won't leave it on that note, but it's something that I've experienced personally many times. And I think that's why this resonates so much with me, because it's such a kick in the teeth when it happens time and time again, and you tell yourself and you hear it from other people, you should know better. But actually, I think it's time to let some people and ourselves off the hook a little bit, because unfortunately, as I say, not everybody has the best of intentions, and definitely not everybody has the level of emotional maturity or self-awareness, even if their intentions aren't poor. They may not have the same levels in those areas that we do. So I think it also teaches us that freedom without safety isn't freedom at all. And I think, without sounding like a mum, which I am, or a teacher, I think that's super important to get that message across, especially to the younger generation. I don't consider myself old, but I've definitely moved out of that illusion, so to speak, that freedom is freedom if it's not safe, because it certainly isn't. And also, I think she teaches us here that strength doesn't mean that you won't still get blindsided by someone who swore that they adored you. So ultimately, my takeaways, other than those three, which is enough, that's enough in themselves. But my real takeaways here is that there are no true rules in love. There's only unrules. So those half-spoken agreements that we invent to feel evolved. But there are emotional laws. So emotional laws still remain, which are honesty, respect, curiosity, and care. And that is what sounds like it's been broken here. And when they're broken, I think that the heart sort of knows that they're broken long before the head catches up. Definitely, I am testament to that in my past. So I think maybe the real lesson here is to stop blaming women for believing in partnership, and to see consent not as a contract of endurance, but as an act of trust. And also, I think to remember that being sort of chill, that Lily Allen character, isn't actually a strength. And I don't want to criticize her whole persona, because I think she is a cool girl, but I don't mean like her personality as such. I mean that being chill, and being so chill that you go with the flow in every situation. Often that's actually just a freeze response in disguise. So if it can happen to someone as sharp and as self-possessed as I view Lily Allen, it really can happen to any of us. And again, I don't mean to leave this episode on a downer. I just want to remind people, I think, in this, of the lessons and the really important observations that if it does happen to you, or it has happened to you, and it certainly has happened, not this scenario, not an open relationship, but similar concepts has happened to me. But I just want to remind you that that doesn't make you foolish. It actually just makes you exquisitely, bravely human. So yeah, we're going to end it there. I'm Chloe Jackson, and this is At Core. And until next time, show up gently, boldly, and always with your whole heart.